something that's very close to my heart, which is living in a high-speed networked world to get your job done every day. Now, how many of you manage your own storage on your computers? How many of you back up your computers, as an example? How many of you have had a crash in the last, 3 years, 4 years? Right. Okay, let me describe the world I live in. About 8 years ago, we had high-speed networking connected to our now obsolete Next hardware running NextStep at the time. And because we were using NFS, we were able to take all of our personal data, our home directories we call them, off of our local machines and put them on a server. And the software made that completely transparent, and because the server had a lot of RAM on it, in some cases it was actually faster to get stuff from the server than it was to get stuff off your local hard disk, because in some cases it would be cached in the RAM of the server if it was in popular use. But what was really remarkable was that the organization could hire a professional person to back up that server every night, and could afford to spend a little bit more on that server, so maybe it had redundant disk drives, redundant power supplies. And in the last 7 years, you know how many times I have lost any personal data? 0. Do you know how many times I've backed up my computer? 0. I have computers at Apple, at Next, at Pixar, and at home. I walk up to any of them and log in as myself. It goes over the network, finds my home directory on the server, and it just is, I've got my stuff wherever I am. Wherever I am. And none of that is on a local hard disk. Now, what's really interesting to me is that gigabit Ethernet's coming. With gigabit Ethernet, it is faster in every case to talk to the server than it is my local hard disk. And one of the things I'm really excited about is to look at that personal computer and take out every moving part except the keyboard and the mouse. I don't need a hard disk in my computer if I can get to the server faster. See, because I look at that network connection as NFS dial tone. I get internet dial tone and NFS dial tone over that wire. And I don't care how it's done. I don't care what box is at the other end. We happen to use an Auspex at Next, right? Big one. Spent $500,000 on it. It was worth it. We did a lot of software development. Nobody ever lost anything. Nobody ever worried about that stuff. But you could have smaller ones. But managing a network like this is a pain in the butt. Setting it up, getting it all to work is really complicated. One of my hopes is that Apple can do for this new type of network, it's not so new, but for the average person it's new, with gigabit Ethernet technologies and some of the new server stuff that's coming down the pike, and some thinner hardware clients that are thinner, not necessarily software, that Apple could make that as plug and play for mere mortals as it made the user experience over a decade ago. That's one of the things where I think there's a giant hole. And I can't communicate to you how awesome this is unless you use it. And what you would decide within a day or two is that carrying around these non-connected computers or computers with tons of state in them, tons of data and state in them, is Byzantine by comparison. So there's about 3 or 4 things like that where I think there is enormous opportunity, and where I think, a lot of times, both in people and in organizations, your greatest strength can be your greatest weakness, or your greatest weakness can be your greatest strength. Apple has been highlighted as having an incredibly great weakness of being totally vertically integrated. Well, it doesn't make its own semiconductors, but it makes the hardware, it makes the software, it controls the user experience, it does the marketing and distribute, it does the marketing. And Many people are constantly calling for Apple to get out of the hardware business because of that weakness that they perceive. I don't agree with that. I perceive it as a potential weakness if not managed right. I also perceive it as Apple's greatest strength if managed right. Let me give you an example. Plug and play. I mean, to get anything done in the PC industry seems to take years. Plug and play was an initiative that was launched 5 years ago. It took 2 years to get it all together between Microsoft and Compaq, and then Intel fought with them. Finally, they got Intel into the fold. And here we are 5 years later, and still it doesn't really work. Every little thing, you can imagine how long it will take them to make a thin client standard and servers that plug and play with thin clients easily. I mean, we're into the third millennium. So the fact that Apple controls the product design from end to end, hardware, software, gives Apple an incredibly unique opportunity. It's the only company in the industry that does that. An incredibly unique opportunity to tackle some of these really gnarly, complex problems that could have enormous potential advantage in the market if we could solve them. And I think solve them literally a half a decade to a decade sooner than the 93-headed monster out there in the Wintel space. Now, they have their advantages too, don't get me wrong. But I think one of our great advantages is that we can really have the vision that spans all the disciplines. We control all the disciplines to actually implement a vision much faster if we can get ourselves all going in a few directions.
That really sounded great. And as you were talking about it, I was sort of getting caught up in it. And then it occurred to me, that's a really great vision for Apple, but then I asked about holes for developers.
Oh, I'll give you a simple one. I'll give you tons of simple ones. Microsoft hasn't committed to port their suite of applications yet, have they? To Rhapsody. What are you waiting for? Adobe. Do you know how many copies of a Photoshop Adobe ships every month? Bazillions! That's the foundation of Adobe, is Photoshop. Adobe has not, to my knowledge, committed to port Photoshop to Rhapsody yet. What are you waiting for? This is huge. This is the opportunity to do something, the next generation of apps. Look, there was a company called Lighthouse that was actually bought by Sun about 6 months ago. They were the best next step developer. They had 18 developers, okay? They had by far and away the best presentation application I've ever seen in my life called Concurrence. I still use it today. They had a suite of 5 different apps, and each one was best of breed. The best spreadsheet I've ever used in my life, called Quantrix, that was modeled on Improv. How many people have used Improv here? Okay? Improv is the best spreadsheet in the planet because it incorporates a whole new way of thinking about spreadsheets. It's about for people like me that want to model things. It's phenomenally powerful. And Lotus couldn't figure out to compete with themselves with 1, 2, 3, so they gave it up, and Lighthouse copied it. 18 developers, 5 apps, because of the power of this development environment. What Apple's going to be putting in your hands is a system that you can build apps for 5 to 10 times faster than anything out there, period. And you can choose to do one of 2 things or somewhere in the middle with this power. One, you can make existing complexity apps 5 to 10 times faster, which means that 3 people really can go into a garage on day 1 with a concept and come out in the market with a product 6 to 9 months later. Now, I haven't seen that in our industry in 10, 12 years. And that's very, very, very exciting to me. And some people say, well, it'll only run on a Macintosh, or it'll only run on Rhapsody, selling on Intel maybe, and selling on a Macintosh. Jesus, it's only a single-digit % of the market. Well, Jesus, it's only 3+ million copies a year. I wouldn't mind selling into that market. It's huge, especially if you're a 3-person, 10-person, 18-person software development company. Lighthouse was making a good living selling to the next step market. Give me a break. You know? So, I think there's a huge market out there. And I think there's still tremendous loyalty towards Apple by some of these customers. I mean, if Adobe doesn't want to write the next generation Photoshop on Rhapsody, some of you should. You know, maybe they'll buy it. Who knows? But the publishing market out there would love to see the next generation thing, but even more so, you know who would love it even more than them? Apple, right? You walk in here and say, I've got something that's 5 times better than Photoshop for these publishing people. And if enough of the publishing people agree to where you can convince Apple that that's really the case, you know how much Apple spends on marketing each year? They should spend some of it on these apps and telling the world about them. So if you come up with something really great, I think it's going to get out there. And I think that this is a pretty unique opportunity. But I want to get back to the last point I was making. One of the other things you can do with these powerful tools, in addition to building a current complexity app 5, 10 times faster, is build an app you couldn't build on any platform. And that, to me, is the most exciting, is to build an app you could not build on any other platform, because it's all about managing complexity, right? You're developers, you know that. It's all about managing complexity. It's like scaffolding, right? You erect some scaffolding, and if you keep going up and up and up, eventually the scaffolding collapses of its own weight, right? That's what building software is. It's how much scaffolding can you erect before the whole thing collapses of its own weight. Doesn't matter how many people you have working on it. Doesn't matter if you're Microsoft with 300, 400 people, 500 people on the team. It will collapse under its own weight. You've read the Mythical Man Month, right? Basic premise of this is a software development project gets to a certain size where if you add one more person, the amount of energy to communicate with that person is actually greater than their net contribution to the project, so it slows down. So you have local maximum and then it comes down. We all know that about software. It's about managing complexity. These tools allow you to not have to worry about 90% of the stuff you've worried about, so that you can erect your 5 stories of scaffolding, but starting at story number 23 instead of starting at story number 6. You can get a lot higher. Sir?
You mentioned the stocks and how we can really look forward to that toward the end of the year. I'm wondering, can you make any comment whatsoever on Larry Ellison?
Well, there's lots of comments one could make about Larry Ellison. I've never dated Larry, so that excludes a bunch of them. No, actually, Larry's my best friend, and it put me in a slightly awkward situation. And I have certainly encouraged him, you know, to not seek to take control of Apple, because I think Apple's on a good course right now, and I think Larry's on an awesome course. I mean, one of the things I told him was, look, if you took a poll in Silicon Valley of what company you'd like to run, you know, Oracle would be at the top of many people's lists. Second largest software company in the world, one of the most dynamic companies on the planet, and Larry built it from scratch, and he's got one of the greatest jobs in the world. So I think, you know, I think Larry is, has, you know, he's made his public pronouncements that he's going to stick to running Oracle. So I wouldn't worry about that. And I think what we need to worry about is just making some great products and getting some great applications on them and telling our customers about both of those things. Yes, sir. Oh, I'm sorry. Let's go to the back. Sir.
A few weeks ago, the Wall Street Journal announced the profit figures for Microsoft. And they also said that in this industry, the only companies really doing well are Intel, Microsoft, and perhaps Compaq.